Welcome to the second presentation for day one, Developing Heritage and Nature-Based Tourism in the Humber Head Levels and the Ancone Valley. And the themes for this presentation are integrated tourism planning issues. Picture there of the launch of our Wilder Ancone project at Brigg. And Brigg is a fantastic central hub for potentially growing tourism within the Ancone Valley. So I want to raise some issues and talk about relationships between countryside tourism and recreation strategies and regional planning and development. There's two-way interactions with planning and economic development processes. And when you have a weak tourism base, then you can assume that many of these connections and these interactions are not fully functional. There are implications of overall planning and development which may be positive or negative for tourism. And if we are really genuinely aspiring to harness the power of tourism and of leisure, then we need to think about how we integrate planning and development more effectively into heritage, nature, and tourism planning. There are impacts of the tourism industry on regional planning and of regional planning for developing the tourism industry. So what we will be hoping will be to see integrated approaches. And sadly, this is often not the case. But to be successful, we need to integrate development planning and tourism planning processes as closely as possible to try and make sure they are effectively aligned. Otherwise, we may accidentally damage the tourism potential. So you remove heritage, you disrupt landscape, and you cause biodiversity to become extinct. And that may well lessen the long-term sustainable potential of leisure and tourism. So we need to think about the strategic process. The first stage is the initiation process. So stakeholder demand, perceived need, response to issues. Second stage is the identification of purpose. What are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? What are the limitations? Third stage is strategic analysis, environmental analysis. What are the factors affecting it? Market analysis, competitor analysis, resource analysis, aspirations analysis. What do stakeholders want? We often forget that. Situation and context analysis. Is the vision appropriate for the locale that we're dealing with? Stage 4 is the vision, goal setting, and objective setting. So long-term vision, goals and objectives, strategic plans, mid-term goals and objectives, operating plans and action plans, and then short-term objectives and day-to-day decisions and decision-making. Stage 5 is the tourism management methods, looking at methods, tools, and techniques in relation to the mission, the goals, and the objectives, with visitor research and monitoring, marketing, interpretation, community consultation, impact statements, forecasting, and resource management. All stages 1 to 5 are subject to specific decisions and non-decisions. All should be subject to appropriate indicators, and these should relate to project monitoring and review. There's some key issues to consider. First of all, very, very basic, but often not considered in the cold light of day. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you undertaking the planning process? What are the boundaries or limitations of the planning process? What can you actually achieve or influence in practice? And what is outside your zone of influence? Another thing to remember, and I've often had this discussion with colleagues who are local authority planners, for example, is that planning is only the beginning, not the end. It's a platform from which the other things are built. But when you finish the planning process, that's just the start of the actual project development on site. We need to think about what will attract visitors, visitor attractions. So are there man-made attractions designed to attract tourists? Man-made attractions not designed to attract tourists, but effectively acting as attractants. Special events and festivals, which are again often overlooked, but can be incredibly good ways and low-cost ways of triggering recreation, leisure, and tourism to a region. And then natural environmental attractions. So the tourism and recreation planning process, part 1. So review policies, goals, objectives. Part 2, evaluate provision. Part 3, consultation. Part 4, assess demand. Part 5, determine shortage or surplus of existing provision. Tourism and recreation planning process, part 2. Identify available resources. And you may have to think creatively about this. Select your management options, or what I also described as interventions. And then part 8, produce a strategy or regional tourism development plan. So this will be something that's out there, will have been consulted on, and will have broad support throughout stakeholders and the wider community. Part 9, implement the plan with actions, interventions. Monitor and evaluate progress. And then 11, determine shortage or surplus of existing provision. So where have you got either an excess or where have you got a shortfall? And then you return to stage 1 to review, assess, evaluate, and consult. So when we look at a region like the Humber Levels or the Ancone Valley, there's potential to grow tourism across that region. But growth needs to be embedded in an effective strategic framework. Otherwise, what you get and what we see is a sort of random matrix, if you like, of initiatives, some of which are successful, some of which are less successful, but overall fail to deliver a critical mass, which could be delivered more effectively through better coordination and an effective strategic framework. So the sub-regional leisure and tourism market can be encouraged to grow and to support tourism infrastructure. And we have this classic dilemma with tourism that if you have visitors, the facilities are and infrastructure supported. And if you don't have the facilities, the infrastructure, the tourists won't come in the first place. And if we look at Asken, for example, where I did quite a lot of work 10 or 15 years ago, we were looking at the tourism potential of the area, which is an historic visitor centre. It was a Victorian tourism centre before it was discovered by deep coal mining and everything that followed. But when we were doing the reviews, the local authority was still knocking down some of the key buildings, and developers were knocking down some of the key buildings that could have been part of that future marketing strategy. They're actually destroying the goose, if you like, that could lay the golden egg. So for this to be effective and sustainable, we need to look at links to regional tourism, nature-based tourism, and the markets must be firmly established. We've got some fantastic examples and resources. The boating facilities, the canals and the canalized rivers across the area, and the boating facilities here at Thorn, so the marina. These provide a really good set of self-supporting, self-financing hubs, which can then be spun out to grow the wider experience. But what you need to be thinking about is how you actually maximize the benefit, how you connect the different and often disparate actors and stakeholders into a better coordinated whole. So there are significant opportunities to grow nature-based and heritage leisure and tourism industries. There are strong links to mainstream heritage, cultural and religious tourism. There are links to natural resource of an area and regional heritage tourism through crafts, arts, foods. And there's a need to establish brands and images to guide and influence perceptions. So patterns in tourism development, growth and decline, which we mentioned in the previous presentation. This is the classic tourism cycle. And you can grow up from a very minimal base here, and it sort of describes some of the possible steps en route if you're looking at a major centre and trying to develop your tourism base. Well, the early stages are things like sports tourism, cultural itineraries, naturalist tourism, aquatic sports, etc., etc. But you can then start to grow the infrastructure, the perceptions, the resource, the visitor base, coming to maturity. And then this is the point which I highlighted last time. You may be able to reinvent yourself and keep bouncing upwards, or you may go into a terminal decline. And that is the fear that we've often got with these initiatives. That's the red zone. Thank you very much for that. And we will move on to the third.